simple. We don't want to spend a lot of time tonight, so I want to be able to see it, all right? But the thing that I'm going to tell you is that what we want to do, and I can adjust this, by the way, so that it's straight up and down. You can see how this easel works, so it's pretty good from that standpoint. One of the things right now is that you have to get a composition. All right, and you're going to say, well, how do you get a composition? The key for me is understanding that I come from a position of not having a preconceived idea. So that's really important to me. I'm not the kind of person that takes a photograph of something and then copies the photograph, because that's not a preconceived idea. You understand? Preconceived idea is where you don't know how it's going to work. All right? And the key here is to see just what will happen. So the first thing that I do is I kind of just follow lines. All right? I'm not trying to think about objects up there, but this is for everybody who's new at this. All right? And it's a concept that might be hard to grasp, because you interpret these things and you separate them. And in a way, that's not what I want you to do. I want you to see them all as a unit. So I'm going to start with something that's kind of interesting, and that is I have to think about the size here as to how it will fit on this rectangle. All right? But there's a line that might be interesting to me that I might want to follow first. All right? And it's a line that perhaps maybe when you look at it, I'm going to start right here. And I'm just going to work my way up here and through. So that's why I put this cloth on here, all right? So if you want to come behind me and just see what I'm going to do here, just kind of follow me. But I'm just going to take a line, and I'm just going to do it slowly. And I'm going to feel its length, and I'm just going to feel the direction of it, its angle, all right, and its size, as far as its relationship to other things. And I'm just going to follow it, all right? So right here, that line is this. I think I came up here and somehow went like that, all right? Yeah. All right, so you can see that little corner that's in there. But we're just going to continue to follow this line, all right? And it's going to come over, and this is one of the things. I'm not really choosing which way to go, all right? I'm just kind of following the line. So this line is coming over here, something like that. All right, that's this whole area right here. Okay, and the next thing, I'm going to come back, because the line went outside the image area. I'm just going to come back to where it continues here. And it kind of goes like this, and it's going to go around, okay? And I can feel the different sections. And truthfully, there's some of the lines that go straight down, like this one. And it's right here, which is this line right here, okay? So I just came around and followed it as it went down. And I'm going to come back up here again and go over. But now, this is what's very interesting. I hit this shadow right here. My eyes, I'm drawing this line to here like this. All right, you can see right now, it's relatively abstract. You wouldn't know what it was at this point. But I'm going to come and I'm just going to follow a line, and you can kind of see how I connect to a shape like this, which we would call the onion, all right? So this is part of the onion. The onion goes up, and it goes up so far, and it hits the dark shadow that's right here underneath the orange cucumber, all right? And so now I'm going to go back there, and then that line goes so far, and it kind of comes forward as a shadow. And as it comes forward as a shadow, it hits the lemon. And the lemon is right about here like this. Okay, and as that lemon comes down, it hits the shadow of the lemon. Okay, and it comes around like this, and becomes the into the lemon like this, and then up. Okay, and we can kind of come back and go over, and there becomes some of the lemon. Okay, from there, and don't worry, you know, distance-wise, there may be some problems in the distance, all right, but that's not what we're worried about right now. What we're dealing with is just trying to find the lines that connect, all right? And we kind of see where this line is over here, and this is the cucumber that comes across like this, okay? And it kind of comes up like this, and then what it does is come across here and goes up. We're looking at the cucumber coming across this way, but it hits this pitcher that's right here, okay? And as we hit the pitcher, then we go up this line, and we're gonna follow it so far, and it comes around, okay? It comes in here like this, and then just makes this turn here like this, and as it goes up, it hits the line of this picture right here. And so now I'm going to follow that line across, okay? And I've just got to look at where I think things line up a little bit, okay? So kind of comes across about here, and then it might go down like this, where the fold in the magazine is, and then the magazine goes like that. So you can kind of get an idea that we're starting to put the still life together, but we're not putting it together by drawing one object at a time. We're really just following the line and trying to feel its length and its direction, things like that. There's a distance problem in here. Could I come back and correct that? I could come back and correct that if I wanted to, all right? But I'm not going to fool around with that as much at this point, because everything, whenever we do anything, it's not going to be perfect in the beginning, all right? So, but I want to show you how this all plays out. Okay, so we're going to come back down here to where that cucumber was, and it hits the side of this cloth that actually goes down here like this and hits there. And then we have, what's very interesting, we have a shadow that kind of comes up here. It's sort of interesting, all right? And you can kind of see how it goes like that, and it kind of bends, well, it goes even beyond this curve, all right? And it kind of bends and goes out like that. So now you're starting to see a pattern of shapes, all right? Somewhat abstract, okay? So now let's go and let's see what happens when we start thinking a little bit more representationally, all right? We have our green cucumber that comes along here like this, and it hits the orange one. You notice that what I do is not to try to see them as objects, but just see them as connections of lines. All right. So now this comes down like this. All right, comes around here, and then it comes to that onion that was there, and then this becomes the onion. Okay, so now we're starting to get this to work, and our cucumber comes up here like this, because this was a shadow here. All right, this one goes under like that. We have, this is where things start to make a little bit more sense. We have the pitcher. Now, this is where we run into some problems, because the pitcher obviously is maybe distance-wise, we might have had to adjust it to go up, all right? Here's the top of it, all right, and it kind of goes like this, and then we have our handle that kind of comes around, and maybe we didn't give our handle enough room, because when you come back over here, you can kind of see that it comes out a little bit further. It comes down like this, and then it hits this pitcher here, and then the pitcher comes down. So you kind of get an idea that we've really put together the still life, okay, just by drawing in ways that are just, this is a challenge somewhat, all right, to make this and try to get it in proportion, but this is what art is all about. It is a challenge to begin with, all right, so you don't take anything for granted, and if you really make one that really works, okay, then you can't help but feel really great about it, all right, but I think the thing is that we're seeing how we're dealing with drawing something with no preconceived idea. So everything's just kind of falling in place for me, following line. And honestly, if you were to say, do I get good compositions? I get excellent compositions out of things like this, all right? So, okay, so now we're, and you can see I didn't plan this out at all right? And if we could even get into the picture here, and of course this was coming down, I guess is the bottom of the magazine, so the magazine comes right about in here like that, goes across, has a shadow underneath, okay, it has a shadow here, and see how I'm getting shapes right now? Okay, well that's probably the most important thing that we can do here, is just to kind of get patterns of shape. Because once we have our shapes, then we can kind of go ahead and put in, you know, other things. So here's another line, it kind of comes down here like this, and then we have this line that went over. I'm just kind of looking to see where these lines are, but you know, our folds start to appear, okay, and our down here like this. So this one was coming across and went up like this, and then came back across like this and down, something like that. Okay, so if anything, here's our here's our table. Okay, so that wasn't. You see how that all just kind of fell together. Okay. Well, with that, once you do something like that, that's the first part. Okay, is getting that idea. Well, after you get the idea, I'm just going to erase it. After you get an idea, the next thing is to kind of know. Okay, if it's out of proportion too much, you can adjust it. All right, meaning that I could, if I wanted to, give myself more room here. I think the only real area that I probably needed to change was right in here, okay, size-wise. All right, so that gave me a little bit more distance. But the other thing was just where the handle was, which was a little bit more difficult. All right, so now what do I do next? Well, you notice that right now what I'm doing is just slightly softening these lines. I did these lines strong enough so that you could see them, but if I was drawing in my sketchbook, these would be very, very light lines. All right? Because you don't want them to misinterpret line as being a white line if it's a dark line. So you just really just soften this a little bit more. All right? So the next thing that I do, all right, and this is real important about painting. I tend to, and the brushes that I'm going to use for the gouache are, and I need to get this right. The brushes that I use are, these are mostly oil brushes, all right? You can use watercolor brushes as well. There's one here that's a little bit softer. As a matter of fact, I think I have one more that I'm going to use right here. Because I was looking to see if I had brought my watercolor brushes. The last time I gave this demonstration, by the way, Teresa will tell you, I forgot to bring my brushes, right? Were you at that demo?
Oh, you use Rubbing.
I use rags, all right? Yeah, I forgot to bring the brushes, so anyhow. All right, well, with gouache, one of the things is to kind of look at the order of values and understand the kind of elements that you're working with. One of the keys on a tone ground is that you can go light and dark simultaneously. All right, so we're going to go after the lights first because it's interesting, but the lights here are what are defining the darks. So what I'm going to be looking for is the squint. I always squint, all right, and I'm going to look to see where my strongest light is. All right, and with gouache, you could start out very, very loosely, almost like watercolor. All right, but you can just start by throwing in where the strongest light is. And that light originated right about in here, and it's kind of working its way over. And as it works its way over, you notice I use a little bit more water, all right? And I'm adjusting the value. But like any medium, you need to be able to see it, you know, how its properties are and the kind of surface that you're working on. Watch how this dries, because it's going to be very interesting how it's drying. The gouache usually goes on very, very lightly in the beginning. It looks like it's light when you first put it on, but notice it's starting to get grayer. All right. So what I'm doing right now is just looking at where the light's coming from and how the objects would be catching light. All right. So you can kind of get an idea. I'm not really going after color right now. I'm going after the division between light and dark. All right, and that's the first thing that I'm going to tell you when you're working with color, is not to think you can, and I've plenty of times done the exact opposite of that I'm telling you right now. All right, but for somebody who's learning for the first time, all right, the key is to kind of go after these divisions. And so you can kind of get an idea now of what this is looking like based upon where the light's coming from. And you know, I've got a pretty good sense of how light works, all right? So, you know, you can see how I'm putting it in, and just, we're gonna go into the lower part here now, and just go after those patterns of cloth and the folds perhaps. And this is where you don't necessarily have to follow lines, all right? I mean, you want to follow the shapes, but if your lines were a little off, or you didn't make them big enough or whatever, you could very easily just adjust everything, all right? So I think, you know, for me, that's, you know, when I put a drawing this precisely down, I definitely want to make sure that, you know, things are relatively accurate. But at the same time, I know that I've always got to play with this stuff, all right, to make it work. So, so you can kind of get an idea of how that came together pretty easily. Huh? What do you think, Vanessa? Do you think you could handle that?
I could handle it, but
Yeah.
it doesn't sound easy.
Why? Look
I
at
can't
it.
even see the light.
Huh? You can't see the light up there?
I can see, but
You know
they
how I
all
know?
look bright to me, you know?
They all look bright, but there are secrets. The secret is that you look at something that gives you a definition of the light. Certain colors up there are not giving you that. You don't see it very easily in the yellow, in the green one. All right, the green one looks dark, but you have to think of how the light is hitting it. All right, so and that's by looking at the lemon. The lemon's going to tell you that. All right. So the other thing that we can do is we can go after, and this is where
Are you using white or gray?
just white, and I'm using, and it's on a toned surface, and I'm using water now, and I'm using a lot more water. That looks really light right now, but I'm going to just put it in. And this is where I use my, what do I call it, the negative. The negative space is space that defines form, all right, but isn't the form. It's the space around it. So we're defining the form based upon the pattern of the light that's there. We know that light is not lighter than this, all right? We can tell how much lighter that is. So give this time to dry, first of all right? But go ahead and put it in. And squint, because you want to make sure, you know, like for instance, when I look in here, I want to make sure the value, the light value that's in here as well, okay? And we obviously have a lighter value here. This is medium tone space. It's a gray, it's not a light, okay? And it's really interesting, but the magazine, which you think of as being white, is the darkest of the whites. So you're, you know, handling that, if you were to put anything in there, it would just be so subtle that you wouldn't, okay? So now we have that, all right? The next thing is to look at our darks, all right? So one of the keys to working with the darks is just to lightly squint and to think about where your strongest darks are. Usually your strongest darks are where your strongest lights are, all right? So you really look to see where those strong lights are. Now I have a variety of brushes, and I can go to one that's a little bit more precise for this, but I'm gonna take my darkest red and my darkest blue, and I'm gonna make a dark out of this, maybe even a touch of the dark green, all right? And I'll determine how warm or how cool that dark is, all right? And I feel a little bit red or dark under here, but I see a dark under this part of the onion, okay? And the other dark really feels even redder, almost oranger. So I'm gonna mix some orange into this dark, okay? And it's here. So that doesn't look orange enough, so I'm gonna just throw a little bit more orange into it. All right, and just kind of, now this is, for the people that are watching this on Facebook, this is for, I'm doing this particularly for beginning students, because I think if you were to ask me how I would approach this painting myself at other times, I probably wouldn't even draw, all right? So I think that this is one of the things to keep in mind, all right? So the next one here, it's really interesting, but because I took that darkest red, that darkest green, and that darkest blue, the shadow over here really felt green. I don't know if you can see that, but where I am, that's a green shadow. So I've got a blue shadow here, a red shadow here, and a green shadow there. I don't even know if you see that as much. And then actually back here in the back is sort of an orangish shadow, because sometimes objects will cast shadows that are reflections of themselves. So maybe the green underneath the cucumber is because of the reflection of the green into the shadow, all right? So now I've placed some of the shadows, and I can even go through and find some other, I always say warm and cool to myself. So I want people to understand what that means. That means that whenever I'm looking at something, I'm comparing things based on their temperature, because I can then understand their color. Okay, and back here we have this nice dark of the painting that's back there. And remember, watch the paper here, because it will show you how the paper's drying. Now, we play with this. We play with this by going after, say, the orange shadows that are down in here, like in here. All right, there's an orange shadow. All right, so we can, with gouache, you can add water to it later if you want, because it's always water soluble. All right, so this is going to dry. This is not going to be orange. I guarantee it's going to be green, but it's going to get oranger because of the there'll be a little bit of orange in it, but the green underneath is going to appear, and so I'm not worried about that color yet. Okay, this is one of the things in gouache that you need to learn how to do. Now, the thing that I'm going to go after now, and this is because I said this wasn't going to be a really long lecture. I want to show you exactly how to use the gouache in a way that will work for you. One of the most important things is we need to go to where the strongest moment of light is, and we need to get the strength of it. This is where we use a flatter brush and we use a thicker paint. So all along, when you're working with gouache, you're starting out with thin transparencies. And then, the other thing is, you have to say to yourself, what's the color of the light? Now, titanium white tends to be more yellow, but sometimes you may have to add yellow to it. You can see the dry brush. Do you see the dry brush here? All right, you can see the texture of the paper. Well, that's important too, because you can really put that paint on really thickly and move it, all right? But as we do that, all right, the next thing we're going to do is just say warm and cool to ourselves. And one of the things that happens is you see it getting oranger over here. All right, so it's yellower over there, yellower and white. And as it goes away from the light, it starts to get oranger. All right, so here, the transition is going from the yellow-white light to the orange light. And if I use more water, it becomes a greener surface. So we can, you know, we can add more water there. But you can kind of get an idea of the understanding of how thick that is right there. And with gouache particularly, you will not wind up, in other words, I'm almost using the gouache pure here, and you can kind of get an understanding of how that can work like that. And if I want to, and by the way, a lot of illustrators work with gouache, okay? So if I want to add a yellow to the white, it's water soluble. All I have to do is put yellow in it, okay? And then the next thing is, let's go after the colors that you understand. All right, this is what we mean by local color. Local color is we go after the yellow lemon. Now, if we put this paint on thick here, look how thick that is. All right, if I just paint with water, I can take that thick paint, I can work away from that, and I can just use water and I can model. All right, and the more water I use, obviously, the, you know, and if you feel a little orange under there, okay, we'll mix a little orange into the yellow again. Okay, oops, it's going to be darker. So this is sort of an orange yellow dark here. Okay, maybe a little bit more yellow. Okay, but we're going to start to try and see the shapes of the values and the colors that we're working with. Okay, so here that was, and by the way, watch this. This is where you really go after the yellow thicker, and maybe with a little bit of white in it. Okay, but now you really start to bring up the highlight of it, and you can model this so that it's easily modeled. Okay, but we're just putting it on like that, and you know, maybe I'll adjust this a little bit. Okay, so that you can kind of get an understanding. And I'm always saying warm and cool, so if the yellow starts to feel oranger or greener or bluer, then I'm going to add something to it. Okay, like I have a sense of touch of green in here under this side here, so I start to feel the green. All right, so you can kind of get an understanding of how you might do that. All right, so now the next thing is that there's a highlight on here. All right, and that highlight hits right about here. So we want to be able to see that highlight, and that highlight hits right there, okay, and maybe a touch right here. But the thing about this highlight is it's going to integrate itself to that design. Now the next thing we're going to go after is the local color of the orange, all right? And the orange, obviously the orange object is back here. Now that doesn't look orange, does it? All right? So we have to make some yellow with it. And we're gonna have to get it to be close to the orange color that we see. This is what we mean by local color. Local color is color that's easily found, all right? And that's why I set these objects up. And for anybody who's new, you wanna set things up in a very simple way, where you're working with a variety of color, okay? Now, what's very interesting about this piece, though, is that it starts to get a little bit redder, okay, as it goes down here. So now I'm going to add more red, and we can kind of get an understanding of how that's coming out there. Now you notice that what I'm doing is only painting the light, not the dark. See, I didn't fill the whole thing in green, right? Or I mean, yeah, orange. All right, and here we see that there's a lot of green under here. So now we have the green. Okay? And it's darker. So we might, and this is where you can use any kind of dark color, including black if you want, all right? But you have to be careful with black. But you're gonna kind of model it. But it also has a highlight on it. And that highlight is right here, like this. All right, when we do that, okay, when we do that, this is very important because it repeats and it tells us some things. So now let's go to the onion. The onion is light, obviously. We need to get a color that comes close to it. This is a different yellow. This is a Naples yellow. But if I only had cadmium yellow, then I'd have to mix orange with it and more white, because that's what it is. All right? But now we have that. Notice how I'm keeping the shadow side of the object. I really want to keep an understanding of the shadow side of the object, and that's a harder color to make. And let me say this, when you're making these colors, all right, you have to ask yourself some things about the colors relative to other colors. And especially in this area here, this is not a descriptive color. It doesn't really come off as being something we understand very easily. But because we have the green underpainting, all right, we might think of it as green. Okay, or at least a darker green. So we're going to just go ahead and, by the way, with this paint, I can clean my brush off completely, dry it, put water in there, put water on here, and watch. I can pick up the paint with a dry brush. All right, you see that? That's with a dry brush. So now I'm modeling that, all right? And that has a highlight, right about here. Okay? See? It's easy. This is easy, all right? Okay, so the next thing, I want to get into the really hard parts, all right? The green one is easy too, because the green is a yellow green somewhat, okay? It has other colors in it, but it's sort of a yellow green, okay? And we can kind of, now that's too dark, obviously. It doesn't look like a light. So we have to add some more yellow and less green, and we have to get it to look like the yellow-green, okay? So that's more like the yellow-green. See how I put a color down and it didn't work? And then how I had to change it? All right, so now we're just working this. We're always staying on only painting the lights. We're not painting the darks, we're just painting the lights, okay? So here, it really gets dark and almost becomes gray-green. And by the way, where it goes up against a really light object, it will get darker. Always keep this in mind. So right in here, this will get dark because of the light of the lemon, all right? So we want to make sure that you understand that, because that lemon determines how light that cucumber is. And again, that cucumber has a highlight on it, right about here. Okay? So we can leave those now. We don't have to do any more than that, all right? So the next one is to go to the cool form, which tends to feel blue, okay? And by the way, you want to keep a nice fresh palette, keep it clean. All right, one of the things about gouache is that all these dry colors I can use again. We want to find where that blue is, all right? And that vibration of the blue. And that vibration of the blue is in areas like that, all right? It's very interesting, but if I said to you, and this is real important, if I said, do you see any red in here? Okay, if you see red in there, you put the red in. If I say to you, do you see any green in there? Okay, you put the green in. That's too light. That's too light, too bright, too strong, right? So now we just reduce it. Okay, so that's where the green is. And then we say, do we have a highlight? Okay, we have a highlight right about here. Okay, and if we were really looking at highlights, we would say, and by the way, highlights can be colors. So a highlight can actually be a blue or a yellow or a green. So you may want to do that. But we're going to just throw those highlights in because that's where we're seeing that. And what we're going to do now is just go after some of the, and here's where I'm going to use different size brushes, okay, to try and move the paint around. But we're going to go after the picture a little bit more. All right, so, and remember these colors dry. So don't think that they're going to stay exactly the way they're painted. All right, but, and if you, here's a blue, but I feel a little bit of orange in it. You gotta understand that that's how I see color. I can feel color. All right, I just don't see it. And it gets darker down in here. Now, we're gonna go to a few more things to get you to understand this. One of them is that there's certain colors that make other colors. I have to say something about this one because this one feels pink to me. I don't know if you understand this, but when I'm looking here, I'm feeling pink. Now I've used it's too thick a paint. So what I'm gonna use is I'm gonna thin it out a little bit, all right, to make it pinker, okay? But it's pink in here. Are you gonna say, well, how did you see pink? I saw pink because I felt it, all right? Now, the thing is, it might be jumping out at me because it's too light. I can use some water and just get back to that gray ground, all right? And it will model itself, all right? And that's one of the things that you understand about the gouache. And then the next thing that's real important, and these are elements that I want you to understand. These are elements of tension, all right? Tension is that we feel something pushing up against something else. This is hard to understand here, but there is a tension where we see a complete edge. When we see a complete edge, that means that this is the most important thing about edges. When we see a complete edge, we're seeing a contrast. We're seeing a tension, all right? So this is where, when I look at this picture, this is where I feel the most tension against that picture is on this side, because this is where the edges are the strongest. All right? And you know, this gets to be a little bit pinker and a little bit redder, so we'll throw some pink and red in there, and that's maybe a little bit too much, so we'll kind of green it down a little bit, all right, so that it falls in there. But we need to have that tension, and if we don't make that tension, we have to make that tension by getting that edge strong.
What kind of board are you painting on?
This board is artboard, and Plaza Artist Materials sell it in Bethesda, and you know, it's really a good board for gouache. So now here's the, and this is how you use, by the way, anybody that's watching, you use a ground by knowing that if you're working on a gray ground, you mix gray into all the colors to make the colors fall back. If you're working on a green ground, you'll mix green in with all the colors to make them fall back, all right? So the green is, you know, in other words, you just have to understand the board that you're working on. Now, you can see that this paint is drying over here. This contrast is drying. This is
Can
where...
I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you say that fallback one more time? What does that mean, fallback?
Fallback means that it moves back instead of coming toward you. Like right now, that's coming toward me. If I put a little bit of green in its complement, mix them together, mixed it in there, you see how it falls back. It's not coming, it's not coming. In other words, you're watching, and then you're always watching this. You see this piece of white that's here? All my values are based on it. All right, so I'm comparing these values to it. And by the way, they're drying. And I'm also saying warm and cool to myself. So you know, it's funny, but you might look up there at one moment and it looks green. Next moment you look up there and it feels pink or orange. Well, you have to figure that one out by adjusting it. But then the other thing is just to move on and compare other things. Like this is another side here, but it's bluer on this side. Okay? So the value, it's really interesting, but this edge is this side of this picture is being made by, and it's a little bit more yellow back there, but it's being made by the contrast of the light against it on this side, all right, that's stronger, but we need to make it fall back. So you have to kind of understand that. But at the same time, you're comparing it to the other side, and the other side feels bluer, okay? So now and we're gonna end this in a few minutes because you're getting an idea of what is going on here now. But see, it's bluer back here. And by the way, that orange cucumber just might make that white wall be more of a compliment because it's the orange against the coolness of the wall. And it will make the wall do that. Now, what do you think? What do you think? Was this good enough tonight to kind of get started?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's really good,
you know,
yeah.
and just understand
Yeah.
I mean, for the people that are new in here, never painted before, doesn't it look like you can do this?
Oh, yeah.
All right? All right,
Yep.
so this is it.
Thank you very
But
much.
the other thing is
Very
just,
clear.
the
Yeah.
other thing is just measuring.
I
Constantly measuring.
because, you know, I could draw those lines.
Huh?
The pen that you used, what was that?
Which pen was
You
it?
started
White
with
with
Oh, the
pencil.
white pencil,
White
just the white
pencil.
pencil.
pencil, and what did you erase with, just a?
Just eraser, just an eraser.
So what size brushes?
The brushes are, these were just ones that I pulled out, but
Okay.
truthfully, you can use any brushes. With gouache, you can use an oil brush. All right, you can add water, even with an oil brush, you can add
So how
water.
many,
I have some rounds. I mean, you can take a look at the numbers.
okay.
All right, I mean, if you're gonna work on a small painting and it's gonna be precise, you're gonna,
So when do you decide to use flat versus?
okay, the flat, that's a good question. When did I decide to use flat? I use flat when I wanna make the paint thicker,
Okay.
all right? The Impressionists were the first group to have flat brushes, just so you know. So when you look at their paintings, you're gonna see a thicker paint than you saw in other periods of painting. And the interesting thing is, the artist that you could say used really thick paint too was Rembrandt. Rembrandt and his whites used really opaque white, but he didn't have the flat brushes that they have today. So the flats are used usually to put the paint on thicker, and paint. You know, one of the things, if you notice, I brushed a little bit, but I adjusted things too. Now, do you see how it's drying? And you have to watch it dry because it will, like a watercolor will dry differently. I think it dries lighter than what it is, all right? Well, this gouache pretty well holds its color at a certain point. It's not gonna dry any different, you know, but it's when you're using it thick. But I love the medium. And I can really work painterly with this medium as well. I showed you the really controlled way, but for anybody who's starting, this is the kind of thing you need to learn to master. And it's relatively simple. The keys are that I separated the lights and the darks. And I painted the local color where the lights gave me the local color. Now, if I asked you to paint a white object against a white wall, that would be harder than painting an orange object against a white wall. So I set up a range of color here. This is almost all the colors of the spectrum right here. So I set up a yellow, and I set up a green, and a red, you see, and a blue, okay?
So we buy the board dark,
You buy the boards
the
dark.
dark green,
The dark green,
Okay.
they come gray, they come red. Doesn't the gouache look good?
Yeah, it
It's
looks
an
great.
easy medium to take.
Yeah.
And it looks like an oil painting to
Yeah,
a certain extent,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah.
Or a watercolor,
Yeah.
okay? So, and it's simple.
I mean,
And you know, it's,